Rain clung to the cafe windows as a one-legged girl paused just inside the door, her crutches slipping slightly on the wet floor. Tables were full of people who suddenly couldn't see her. Eyes turned away, cups lifted. Silence did the work. Words didn't have to. At the far end, a black single dad sat with his two kids, already aware something was wrong before anyone spoke. The girl's legs shook, her breath tightened. Then she stopped beside his table and asked the question no one wanted to answer. "Can I sit here?" What happened next didn't just change her day. It exposed something deeper. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. And hit subscribe if you believe stories like this shouldn't be ignored. Darius had learned how to exist in public without taking up space. After long days and longer nights, sitting quietly with his kids felt like the safest way to move through the world. He worked hard, stayed invisible, and kept his focus on Naomi and Eli. That afternoon in the cafe wasn't special to him. It was just a stop to warm up, a table near the wall, a moment to breathe before life pulled again. Darius Coleman didn't expect anything to happen there. Naomi watched people the way children do when they're still learning how adults really are. Eli stayed close, legs swinging under the chair, sensing moods he didn't yet have words for. They noticed things their father had trained himself to ignore. Near the door, Alyssa struggled quietly. Pain pulsed where her prosthetic met skin, the kind of ache that builds when you've gone too far with no choice. Alyssa Reed had been walking longer than she should have, telling herself she could make it, telling herself not to be a problem. She was used to that. Her mother worked double shifts, and Karen Reed carried enough worry already. Alyssa didn't want to add more. The cafe had rules, spoken and unspoken. Who belonged? Who was welcome? Who could rest without being questioned? From behind the counter, Emily Parker watched closely, weighing comfort against policy, judgment against compassion. Nothing had exploded yet. No voices were raised. No one had been openly cruel. But tension lived in the quiet, in the way people avoided eye contact, in the way help waited to see if it would be punished. And as Alyssa stood there, deciding whether to ask for something she shouldn't have to beg for, the room leaned toward a moment it wouldn't be able to take back. The moment Alyssa took the seat, the cafe didn't relax. It tightened. Relief touched her face for a second, then disappeared as she realized how many eyes were suddenly aware of her presence. Sitting hadn't erased the stares. It had focused them. Her crutches rested against the table, metal dull against tile, a quiet reminder that she hadn't chosen this moment. She'd arrived at it out of necessity. Darius noticed the shift immediately. Years of navigating spaces that judged before listening had sharpened that instinct. He felt it in the way conversations dipped, and how chairs subtly turned away, and how help suddenly became conditional. Darius Coleman kept his posture calm, but his attention never left Alyssa. His kids sensed it too. Naomi's shoulders stiffened. Eli stopped swinging his legs. Across the room, Emily watched from behind the counter, weighing the scene like a problem she hadn't planned to solve. Emily Parker didn't move closer. She didn't smile. She watched to see what would happen next, as if kindness needed approval before it could exist. The cafe's rules were invisible but firm, and everyone knew who usually paid the price for crossing them. Alyssa tried to sit without taking up space. She tucked her leg in, adjusted her jacket, apologized too quickly for nothing. Pain burned where her prosthetic met skin, but she didn't mention it. She had learned that pain only mattered if it didn't inconvenience others. Alyssa Reed had spent most of her life proving she could manage alone, even when she shouldn't have had to. Time dragged in uncomfortable fragments. Cups clinked. A chair scraped. Someone cleared their throat too loudly. The quiet wasn't peaceful, it was evaluative. Darius felt it settle on him next. The unspoken question hovered. Why was he comfortable breaking the pattern everyone else followed? Naomi leaned closer to him, her voice sharp with the kind of honesty only kids allow themselves. "WHY? Is everyone starring like she did something wrong?" The words cut through the room. Heads shifted. No one answered. Darius didn't either. He placed his hand gently on the table, grounding the moment without silencing it. Eli followed, eyes locked on Alyssa's crutches, not with fear, but with concern. Behind the counter, Emily finally spoke, her tone tight and controlled, loud enough to travel without sounding like a scene. "This table was meant for paying customers." The sentence landed heavy. It wasn't about the table. Everyone knew that. Darius felt the familiar pressure rise, the expectation to explain himself, to justify humanity in neat, acceptable pieces. He didn't rush to respond. Silence stretched, uncomfortable and deliberate. Alyssa's breath caught. She looked down, hands gripping the edge of the chair as if bracing for removal. She had heard variations of this, her whole life polite words, carrying sharp edges. Her voice shook when she finally spoke, louder than she meant to. "I'm not causing trouble. I just need a minute." The room froze. Emily didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked at Darius, at his kids, at the scene she hadn't controlled. The pause made things worse. It allowed judgment to bloom. Darius stood slowly, not aggressively, but firmly enough to be seen. His voice carried without strain, steady and unmistakable. "She's sitting here. That's not up for discussion." The temperature of the cafe changed. Conversation stopped pretending. Eyes locked in. Emily's jaw tightened. Authority challenged in front of witnesses. Naomi felt it and spoke again, louder now, anger finally breaking through confusion. "Why do you always make it hard when someone just needs help?" No one answered her. That silence said more than any insult could have. Across town, Karen waited for her daughter to come home, unaware of how close fear and relief were about to collide. Karen Reed trusted Alyssa to be brave, not knowing how often bravery was forced instead of chosen. The tension didn't break. It deepened. Emily's gaze hardened. Alyssa's hands trembled. Darius didn't sit back down. The cafe felt smaller, its walls listening. Whatever came next would decide more than a seat. It would decide who held power in that room and who would be made to feel small for asking to rest. The cafe reached a breaking point without anyone touching a thing. It happened in the pause after Darius refused to sit back down, when silence became heavier than noise. People had stopped pretending to sip drinks. Phones rested half-lifted, undecided. Authority no longer felt automatic. It felt exposed. Emily stepped out from behind the counter at last. The distance between her and the table shrank, and with it, the comfort she had relied on. Emily Parker had expected compliance. What she hadn't expected was resistance that didn't raise its voice. That kind unsettled her more. Alyssa's hands trembled as she tried to steady her breathing. Sitting had eased the pain in her leg, but the pressure in her chest only grew. She had walked through fear before. This was different. This was public. This was judgment dressed as order. Alyssa Reed realized she was no longer invisible, and that terrified her. Darius didn't move. He stood with the kind of stillness that drew attention without demanding it. His kids remained seated, watching adults fail to explain themselves. Naomi's jaw tightened, anger finally sharpening into something focused. Eli leaned forward, small hands clenched, sensing the danger even if he didn't fully understand it. Emily stopped a few feet away, her voice sharp, echoing off the walls as if volume could restore control. "You need to follow the rules, or you can all leave." The words cracked across the cafe. Chairs shifted. Someone gasped. Alyssa flinched, her grip tightening on the edge of the table. Darius felt the familiar pull, the expectation that he would be the one to de-escalate, to swallow pride for peace. He didn't. Instead, he turned slightly so others could see Alyssa clearly. Not as a problem, as a person. His voice carried, calm but unyielding. "This is exactly what you do. Make people feel like they don't belong." The room changed. Emily's expression faltered, just enough. Naomi couldn't hold back anymore. Her words came fast, raw, louder than intended. "She's hurting and you're acting like a chair is a crime." That was the moment the balance tipped, not because a rule was broken, but because it was named. Eli stood up then, small but fierce, eyes locked on Emily. "Would you say this? If she didn't look different?" No one answered him. They couldn't. The question hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Emily's authority drained in real time, replaced by something brittle and defensive. She glanced around, searching for support that didn't come. The front door opened suddenly, letting in a rush of cold air and urgency. Karen rushed inside, eyes wild, breath uneven. She had run the whole way after getting a call from a stranger who'd seen Alyssa struggle earlier. Karen Reed froze when she saw her daughter surrounded by tension instead of safety. Alyssa turned, tears spilling before she could stop them. "I didn't want to cause trouble. I just couldn't walk anymore." Karen crossed the space without hesitation, wrapping her arms around her daughter. The sight cracked something open in the room. Not sympathy, recognition. The cost of what had been happening settled visibly. Emily took a step back, her certainty gone. Darius finally sat down, but not because he was told to, because the fight had shifted. Power didn't live in the counter anymore. It lived in the truth that had been spoken out loud. No one clapped. No one cheered. That wasn't the kind of moment this was. It was heavier, permanent. The cafe would open again tomorrow, but it would never feel the same to the people who witnessed what had been exposed. As Karen held Alyssa close, the room stayed silent, forced to confront what it had almost allowed. And the question no one could escape was simple. Now that it had been seen, what would they do with it? The cafe didn't return to normal after that moment. It couldn't. The air stayed heavy as people slowly looked away, not out of comfort, but discomfort. What had been exposed couldn't be folded back into silence. Darius Coleman gathered his kids without rushing, his movements steady, controlled. Naomi stayed close, her face tight with anger. She hadn't learned how to soften yet. Eli didn't speak, but his eyes kept tracking the room, memorizing what adults tried to forget. Alyssa Reed remained seated for a while longer, her breathing uneven, the pain in her leg dull but constant. Relief didn't erase what had happened. It only made the weight of it clearer. She hadn't asked for attention. She hadn't asked for a statement. She had asked for a place to sit. That was the part that stayed with her. How something so basic had turned into a public trial. Karen Reed held her daughter tightly, aware that protection sometimes arrives late after damage is done. She didn't thank anyone loudly. Gratitude felt complicated when dignity had been questioned first. What mattered was that Alyssa wasn't alone anymore. Not in that room, not in that moment. Behind the counter, Emily Parker stood still, stripped of certainty. Rules suddenly sounded hollow without the comfort of agreement. She had enforced policy her whole career, but this time it stared back at her, demanding accountability instead of obedience. Nothing was said. Nothing needed to be. Silence carried consequences now. As they left, the cafe watched them go. Some with guilt, some with relief that it hadn't been them, some already preparing to forget. Darius didn't look back. He didn't need to. His kids had seen enough to understand that fairness isn't promised, it's challenged. That night ended without applause or closure. Just awareness. And the truth lingered long after the door closed behind them. When racism doesn't shout, when it hides behind rules and comfort, who is willing to stand? And who will keep pretending they didn't see it? If this story made you uncomfortable, it was meant to. Like this video, share with someone who needs to see it, and drop a comment with your thoughts. Subscribe to Black Community Struggles for stories that don't stay quiet and shouldn't.